Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist. Learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today I'm here to explain to you how to obtain an assistant professorship in the tenured track. Next is how do you apply? Now, you can find the jobs on higeredjobs.com if you're applying in the US market mostly. And if you're applying within the UK market, then on jobs.ac.uk. I'll put the links in the description. Just note that in both cases, the jobs you'll be able to look for are global, meaning not just in the US or in the UK, but elsewhere. But the focus is, as I said, for higeredjobs.com on the US and for jobs.ac.uk on the UK. Additionally, in the US, you can also look on mla.org. Now, very important warning, before we get into any documents, if you are not a US citizen, the first thing you should do is to look for the email of the person who is responsible for the search and then ask, could you please clarify whether this university sponsors visas for international candidates for the purpose of this position? You need to have a clear answer to this question because a lot of them do not sponsor visas. So you will be wasting your time, wasting 10, 20, 30, 40 hours in your search, which you cannot afford to. So if you have the slightest doubt, if it's not explicitly stated in the ad, it's in your best interest to send an email as soon as you see the position you're interested in to clarify on whether this institution actually sponsors visas for international applicants. Now, what documents do you have to submit? There are two documents which are crucial. These are the equivalents of your profile picture and bio in a dating app. If they're not exceptional, you won't get seen. And these are the cover letter and the CV. The cover letter will be the main picture and the CV will be the bio. Let's go with the cover letter. This needs to be absolutely impeccable, ideally curated by a professional. And the structure needs to be very clear and follow the following patterns. First things first, as you can see on the screen, it should be written on letterhead paper. Second, it should contain on top the date when the letter was finalized, then the address in which the department that has published the position is located, and then the members of the search committee if the actual name of the members does not appear in the job ad, or ideally if those names do appear, then those names prefaced by prof.dr. Then you reiterate the position you are applying for. I'm writing to apply for the position of blah 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 in the department of blah 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 at the University of blah blah blah. The next line in the first paragraph should state your qualifications. I hold a PhD in blah 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 from the University of blah blah blah, and I graduated this specific year with a doctoral thesis entitled blah blah blah. The next paragraph should be either about research or about teaching. Now, if the position you're applying for is focused on research, remember, if it's an R1 institution, if it's a small liberal arts college, chances are that is also focused on research. If it's a postdoctoral research fellowship, in all those three cases, you want to start with the research first, immediately after the first paragraph. Conversely, if the position focuses on teaching, for instance, if you're applying to a teaching college or a community college, then you should start by specifying your teaching. Whatever is most important to the position in question, that's where you should lead with. Nobody has the time to scroll down and find on page 95 what the most important information is. No, you need to specify that right after the first paragraph. So if it's focused on research, you should begin with a general paragraph on your research, meaning my research topics and methodologies are these and that. And as a researcher, you should have a couple of topics. The topic of your PhD dissertation and an additional one that you're working on. You can also state the main publications that you have. And then in the next paragraph, you will break down the first topic, the topic, for instance, of your thesis and everything you've done concerning that topic. And in the second paragraph, second topic you're working on and everything you've published concerning that, or even your future plans for publication. Now, once you're done with your research, assuming you're applying to a research-focused position, you will start discussing your teaching. Again, you'll start with a general paragraph summarizing your teaching, meaning what courses have you taught at which institutions, and then you will break it down. You will say, okay, this particular course was devoted to this topic, assuming the topic is relevant for the position in question. Okay. Now that you have finished explaining your research and teaching, or your teaching and research, depending on the focus of the position, then you will do what we call a tailor-made paragraph. In the tailor-made paragraph, you're going to summarize everything you've said so far, relate it to the job ad, and then add a couple lines specifying people with whom you could collaborate and topics on which you could collaborate. And those topics and people are going to be specific of the institution you are applying to. And finally, you just say a couple lines. Thank you very much for considering my application. I will be honored to join your distinguished academic community, or something of the likes. You're going to sign. That signature has to be a picture of your handwritten signature to make it more professional and authentic. And then your first name, your surname, comma, PhD. That's it. The cover letter should be 2 pages. It shouldn't be longer than that. It shouldn't be shorter than that. Adopt Times New Roman 12, ideally. If you can't, then Times New Roman 11. Anything less than that is going to come across as cramped and desperate. Allow for at least 1.15 space between lines and simple space between paragraphs. Again, you want to include a lot of information, but you don't want to come across as overwhelming or desperate. So you need to strike a balance between including a lot of information and keeping it short and to the point. And please, everything you say in the cover letter has to be backed up by evidence. And that evidence is going to come up on the CV. For instance, if you say that you have published a lot for the last 5 years, then your CV needs to have a lot of publications within the last 5 years. Otherwise, you're not being empirically accurate, and even you could argue that you are being disingenuous or deceiving. No emotional talk. It's very important. Don't say you're passionate about the topic in question or the area in question. We already know that, otherwise you wouldn't be applying. Don't say that you hope to do something. Say that you plan to do something. See the difference? Hope is about feelings and emotions. Planning is about something tangible, something logistic. So talk about evidence-based items and back them up with your CV. And before we go any further, let me tell you that I'm fully aware that everybody is different and unique. So if you're actually serious about obtaining your assistant professorship this year, book a one-on-one consultation with me, where I'll give you access to the specific institutions and positions I applied for, and the documents that got me interviews, as well as the ways in which I handle objections during those interviews and conducted my campus visit to secure the best terms in my negotiation for my assistant professorship. I will also have a look at your specific situation. Where is it best to apply for you? What kind of positions are in your best interest? And we will craft together your CV and your cover letter, which are the most important documents, as well as your research statement, teaching statement, diversity statement, and anything else you need. I will also love to coach you for your interviews, help you negotiate your best terms for the offer. And this is one of the best investments you can make in your future, as it will pay for itself already within the first monthly payment as a brand new assistant professor. Book a consultation by clicking on the link below in the description box, and we'll see you on the other side. For the CV, we're going to want to state your name, surname, comma, PhD on top of the document. And then right underneath, you want to state the department where you are and the institution. Not the one you're applying for, but the one where you're currently based. Okay. Then your first section should be education, all in capital letters, bold and underlined. And you're going to state your qualifications in reverse chronological order, meaning the last qualification you obtain should be listed on top. For instance, it is typically going to be your PhD. PhD in this and other field, comma, state the institution, and right underneath you're going to write dissertation title, state the dissertation title, and then dissertation advisor, state your dissertation advisor. That can also carry some prestige if it's a big name in the field. Then the next qualification, typically a master's degree, then the next qualification, etc. Okay, for the rest of the qualifications, you don't need to specify the title of your final project. Typically, it is not specified, so you just want to state what the qualification is, the field, and the institution. For instance, MPhil in Spanish and Portuguese languages and literatures, comma, New York University. Okay. Right underneath, right after education, you will state your academic appointments. These are different. So the education is the diplomas you have, the certificates, whereas the academic appointments are the positions you have held. Typically, as you do your PhD, you will be teaching some hours. Those are the academic appointments that you can list, right? So for instance, you can say teaching assistant in Spanish and Portuguese at New York University, if you were teaching as you were making progress towards your PhD. You're not expected to have a lot of academic appointments at this stage, so don't worry if that list is not long. Now, after education and academic appointments, again, it depends on the position you're applying for. If the position is focused on teaching, you should state the courses you have taught and a brief description. If the position, on the other hand, is focused on research, you should state the publications you have in reverse chronological order. Let's assume it's focused on research, and then we'll do the same with the teaching focus. If it's focused on research, as I said, publications, you might want to include a line concerning your Google Scholar profile or your Scopus profile or similar. And then you're going to begin with your single author books, which is the most prestigious piece. You always want to put the most important information first. That is the underlying principle, right? So single author books, again, reverse chronological order. You're going to put first the publication you have authored the last. So you state the title of the publication, and then the city, and then the publishing house. Then co-author books. These are books you have authored, not edited, authored, but with somebody else. For instance, with one person, two people, etc. Then afterwards, edited collections. These are collections you have edited. You might have written a chapter or two as part of that effort, but you don't have to have done that. It's just an edited collection. You might be a single editor or have co-edited that book with more people. Then you have refereed journal articles. Indicate that these are refereed, meaning peer-reviewed. If you want to write peer-reviewed in the title, that's fine as well. But you have to indicate that. Otherwise, people don't have a reason to assume that these are peer-reviewed. And if they're not peer-reviewed, their value is almost zero for the purpose of an academic position. Again, reverse chronological order. You're going to begin with the title. The title is not going to be in italics. It's going to be in between inverted commas. Then italics for the publication in question, meaning the journal where the article was published. Then the number of the issue, and then the pages. If you want, you can also add the link to the publication in question so that people who read your CV can go afterwards to that website and read your article. Once you have stated your peer-reviewed journal articles, it's time to include information concerning your book chapters. Okay, book chapters come after peer-reviewed journal articles. Now, you might also want to add reviewed book chapters, though most book chapters are, but sometimes that peer-reviewing process is not as strict as concerning journal articles, so you might want to disambiguate that for the search committee, lest they assume it wasn't peer-reviewed. You can also add conference reports, conference proceedings, and book reviews in this order. But these are, I would say, almost optional elements, because here you run the risk of overwriting your CV and a long document is going to put off the search committee. So you don't want to alienate them. You want them to have all the necessary information, but not much more than that. And then if you have translated any publications, you write that last. Next, concerning a research-focused application, is fellowships, grants, awards, and honors. This is important. The institution wants to know that you will bring a lot of money to them. First, you should list fellowships and grants and begin with the external ones, which are the most prestigious ones, right? So it's not the same if you win a fellowship where the only competition was other people within your institution, or if you win a global fellowship where the competition is literally the whole world. Right? So that's why external grants are more prestigious. List them in reverse chronological order, not via amount. You don't list on top the fellowship that brought you the most money. List them in reverse chronological order, but do indicate at the end of each fellowship the exact amount of money. Maybe it was non-stipendiary, meaning it didn't bring any money. If so, specify that too. Okay? The institution wants to know how much money can you bring them. After all the external fellowships and grants, go ahead and list the internal fellowships and grants. And then last but not least, awards, honors, and other scholarship-related indicators of excellence. This can be a travel grant award. This can be a graduate student award, something like that. Second place in a poetry competition, these type of things. Then next, again, assuming the CV is research focused, you're going to list invited talks. These are not talks you gave after applying for a conference. These are talks that were the result of you being invited by somebody in the institution in question, right? An assistant professor at the University of California called you and said, hey, I know you're an expert in this field. We would like you to come one day to our class and give a talk about this specific topic. That's an invited talk. And invited talks are more prestigious than talks that you have given within a conference you have applied to. That's why they are listed first. So invited talks, you're going to specify the title of the talk, the course or the conference within which that talk was given, then place, and finally the dates of that talk. Keynote speaking talks, though rare at this stage of the career, can also be included here. After the invited talks, you're going to want to list conference organization / participation. First, conferences / symposia you have organized in reverse chronological order. Then panels you have organized within a specific conference as opposed to the entire conference. And then papers presented. These are the ones you have presented after submitting an abstract for a specific conference. Papers presented, again, in reverse chronological order, specifying title in between inverted commas, then the name of the event in italics, then place, and then dates. And that, my friends, is about the last item of the research part of your CV. You can also include departmental talks if you think these are decisive. I think these are kind of optional. These are the equivalents of conference proceedings and book reviews. You don't want to overextend the CV, but if you want to include that, you can include that too. Hey, one day at my department, I gave a talk about this topic. Okay. And now for the teaching experience, again, you should list the teaching experience right after the academic appointments section if the position you're applying for is a teaching focused position. If it's not, then list it after everything I just mentioned concerning the research, okay? So now, teaching, you write all caps teaching experience, and then you're going to specify primary instructor, and then the institution where you were a primary instructor teaching courses. You might not have been a primary instructor of any class so far, since you were just a PhD student. That's fine. If that's not the case, then skip to the next section. Now, when you list the courses, again, list them in reverse chronological order. First, the course that you taught last. Okay? You just list the number of the course, then the name of the course, the specific term, spring 2025, for instance, and then you want to include a line or two about the topic of the course or what your responsibilities were, right? For instance, grading papers, conducting discussions, etc. You do the same with the rest of the courses. These courses are not structured in reverse chronological order. They are only structured in reverse chronological order within the institutions. So you should start with the institution you have attended last, and within that institution, the course you have taught last. Then the institution you attended prior to the last one, and then the last course you taught at that institution, etc. That is the right order. If you haven't been primary instructor, as I said before, just list the courses for which you have served as a teaching assistant, okay? Then after that, you want to include a section named Advising and Supervision. Maybe you have supervised a BA thesis or an MA thesis. List the name of the person, name of the student, the institution, the year, and the title of the project, the title of their BA, MA dissertation or equivalent. And then, my friends, we're already finalizing our CV. We just need to include a couple things. We're going to include a section called reviewing. If you have reviewed any journal manuscripts, any books, any book chapters, any conference submissions, you will include that there. Departmental or university service is going to be minimal at this stage, but you can say, for instance, well, I was once a moderator for a panel in the conference that my department held during my last year of the PhD, for instance. That will be service. Or I was vice president of the Spanish club, for instance. That will be service. Then community involvement or outreach. Maybe you have a YouTube channel through which you are teaching in simple terms your research, right? The topic of your research. In that case, that will count as community involvement or outreach. Maybe you have collaborated for a nonprofit related to your research or your teaching. State that there. Then we have the section media coverage. If you have appeared on the news, fancy, you can state that there. If there's an article about your research, which is not in a peer-reviewed journal, but it's on a newspaper, for instance, or in a magazine, you can state that there. Then you're going to state your languages in decreasing order of proficiency. So you will start with your strongest one and then go down the list. Please specify if your proficiency is oral or written or both. Some people are very good with French for research purposes, but they don't speak it, or vice versa. They can speak it, but they're not really used to writing it. So you can specify that there. And lastly, professional affiliations. Are you an active member of any organizations in your field? For instance, in the case of languages, Modern Languages Association, etc. List the name of the institution and when you started being an active member. Then past membership, you can also list that. If you were once part of an organization, but you're no longer, and you still think the organization is relevant to the field for which the application is being prepared, you can list that too. That will be it. Some people add a list of references, others write those references in a different part of the applications, for instance, in the portal or the website of the application in question. If you want to list your references, again, if this is a research position, list your research references first. If it's a teaching position, list your teaching references first. Normally in the US, you are expected to have 3 letters of recommendation, so you should prepare accordingly. As you are preparing your documents, you should contact people who could write those references on your behalf. We'll discuss letters of recommendation later on. For the time being, the bottom line is this. You need your cover letter and your CV to be absolutely spotless. Any mistake, any spelling error, anything that doesn't make sense concerning the CV or the cover letter will mean that you are not selected for the position. So make sure these are spotless.
If you make any mistakes, you have to pay. You make any mistakes, you have to pay.